Coming down with the heartache. Coming down with the heartache.
On this episode of Between Two Beers, we talk to David Higgins. Higgins is the founder of Duco events, but is perhaps best known as New Zealand heavyweight boxer Joseph Parker's manager and the man who organised New Zealand's fight of the century between David Tua and Tua-Cameron in 2009. In this episode, we talk about how, in his 20s, with no boxing experience and little money, he got Tua and Cameron to fight, why he lost control at the infamous Hughie Fury press conference in London and how he feared for his life in the aftermath, growing up in poverty in his relationship with money, and how he manufactured a rivalry between Parker and Anthony Joshua that earned his boxer a world title fight. David was a dream guest for us. He's one of the most fascinating minds in New Zealand sport with a cunning intelligence and the balls to continually bet big on himself and win. He also has a chip on his shoulder and possesses a healthy disdain towards those sports who have failed to embrace him or his ideas. He is truly compelling company. For show notes, links to listen and watch, visit betweentwobeers.com. If you like what we're doing and want to support the show for a cup of coffee a month, click the link to our Patreon page. Many thanks to those already on board. This episode was recorded in December last year, so there are a few references that are slightly out of date. And it was sponsored by NZME, who are partners with Duco and Spark Sport in producing this weekend's fight. Enjoy the ep.
It's New Zealand boxing history being written right before your eyes. World number 3 Joseph Parker versus world number 5 Junior Fa on this Saturday night. Get your Spark Sport pay-per-view pass for just $49.99 and watch the fight live from your living room. Book now at sparksport.co.nz. Stonewood Homes Joseph Parker v Junior Fa in association with Headquarters. Terms apply.
David Higgins, welcome to Between Two Beers.
G'day, Steve. Good to be here.
Great to have you along. I understand you've come straight from hot yoga. Is it?
Bikram, 90-minute Bikram hot yoga. It's fucking brutal.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
I've always wanted to give it a go.
Well, I I always thought it was a bit of silly stretching and you know it would be boring. And I injured my back a couple of years ago and I couldn't run or train. And I've got ADHD. I need to let off steam, and so it was doing my head in, and the back was taking a very long time, and I'd get back in too quick, injure it again. And then someone said, try that Bikram hot yoga, 90 minutes. Anyway, it was the most brutal thing I've been through. I've heard Mark Hunt found it similar, you know, arguably more brutal than the octagon. And I mean, it's 40-something degrees Celsius. And if you're not flexible, it's like running a marathon for 90 minutes in a sauna while trying to balance and tugging at like different stretches, and it, you know, and you almost pass out.
Right. Is it recommended to come straight out of a 90-minute hot yoga and get straight into the beers like we're doing right now?
No, well, not really actually, because you lose a couple of litres of fluid. So, but I'll tell you this though, it can heal injuries, and it's definitely worked wonders for me mentally and physically.
Okay.
Did you ever give hot yoga a try, Steve, through your recovery?
I've given everything a try, but hot yoga is on my to-do list, but maybe after tonight we'll give it a go.
You wouldn't know this, Dave, but Stephen actually had some significant back issues as well, and he's on the mend now thanks to some Wim Hof breathing, some cold immersion, and not some yoga.
Well, Alex Flint, I'm training with, runs Body Talk. He did that, you know, that TV3 show about the rugby guys that have.
Oh yeah, match.
So he's probably the best trainer I've come across, and he's the one that recommended it.
Oh,
so you should try it.
Okay, done. Shay, Dave Higgins is someone we have had our eye on since we started this little venture. Why are you excited to have him in studio?
Well, So, David, I don't know how many episodes you've listened to, if any. And if you haven't, hey, that's okay.
It's a round number.
So we started primarily with football players. We both come from a football background. I did not have an established playing career. Stephen did. I try my best to tear that down as much as possible. But what I do have...
You're built like Maradona, though,
after
10 years after retirement.
Exactly. He's hoping there's a longer stint above the earth. God rest his soul. But I do have an events background, probably not as coloured as yours and a little bit more traditional. So
probably not. Is it you come with probably? You're not quite sure. It might be.
I haven't packed out, sold 80,000 pay-per-views and done a New Zealand record. Sure, I did put an event on in Papua New Guinea, which nobody thought was possible. So I'm really
we've done that too.
You did. You did.
We can talk about that. Yeah.
But yeah, so excited to pick your brain and hear from you, Stephen. You've probably followed David's career a little bit more closely than I have, being with your media background.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, super excited. I have a lot of people who I've talked to in the build up to this, and they've all spoken incredibly highly of you, people whose opinions I trust, bordering between he's a genius to he's just an incredibly innovative thinker and smart, driven. And so, yeah, keen to hear where all the magic comes from. I'm actually going to start, for those who don't know David, I'm going to read a passage. Dylan Cleaver, who's been a former guest on our show, wrote an article earlier this year about the most intriguing characters he's met in sport. And he wrote this about David amongst... he had guys like Grant Dalton, Steve Hansen, Brendan McCullum, and a few others, and Higgins was part of that short list. And he wrote this. He said, "If I held an important position in an ambitious national sporting organisation that was coming out of deep hibernation caused, say, by a pandemic, the first person I would call is David Higgins. The last person New Zealand's NSOs will be calling is David Higgins. That's because the majority of them are devoid of original ideas and hamstrung by boards whose currency is second shelf of the supermarket cab savs, soft cheeses and the status quo. Parker sticks with him and journalists gravitate to him because he gets stuff done. The sort of stuff most sports administrators tut-tut about, as if making money and entertaining crowds is a debasement of their principles. He's been told no most of his life, and he's ignored it. One thing he does better than most in this country, he puts his mouth where his money is. More people in positions of power should listen." Do you feel like that's a fair representation?
Yeah, it's kind of flattering and, I guess accurate in a way, but it's also saddening to be told no constantly and not be, I've probably got a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and the so-called establishment have never really acknowledged or given a leg up, so to speak. And so it's sort of like it's been a battle at times to get concepts off the ground, get sponsors on board, get the rights to do things from those NGOs, etc.
Do you feel like now you have that respect? Are they still saying no to you after everything you've done?
Well, I've had some of the big bosses say well done and acknowledge things lately. They're still a bit wary.
Yeah. Well, this is where you are now. I mean, this is the representation people in my circle have of you. But I'd love to go back to the beginning to see how it all came about. I understand you did a degree in commerce at university, and then I'd love to know how that sort of evolved into getting into events. I understand sort of public speaking was perhaps the start?
Yeah, so the degree, I wasn't passionate about commerce. In fact, I was one of those students, and I'm not proud of this, that didn't study till the night before and sort of slid through and got the degree without, and when you do that, you don't learn anything. And so I got the degree and it was kind of get a job, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so commerce just seemed general, and I could go in various different directions. So leaving that, I ended up in a management cadet position at Spicer's Paper. And it was one of those big old companies where you have to try work around different jobs, forklift truck picking and packing. It was what I was doing then, customer service and sales, and 20 years later you might become a manager type thing. And I didn't like them and they didn't like me, and I was probably a bit outspoken, and I hated the job, and but I stuck it out. I thought, this is life, stop being a pussy, we all have to get up and go to work. And after 6 months of sticking it out, I thought, this isn't what life's about. So I thought, stuff it. So I quit. And then I went to student job search and found a casual position doing events at the Employers and Manufacturers Association. Marketing was what I wanted to get into. And then I never looked back. They sort of gave me an opportunity to run events, business events for their database of a few thousand New Zealand companies. And so I started running events on innovation, product development, occupational health and safety, motivation. And I kind of R&D'd with their event division. I created a conference called Thrive Auckland, which ended up selling out the Aotea Centre. And so I had some successes, and the events were making money, and I enjoyed it. And so a lesson I learned early on was, and I'd say this to any young person, if you don't like what you're doing, change it. There's no honour and nobility in sticking out a job or anything that you hate for year after year, which a lot of people do for their whole life. And, even if you have to keep chopping and changing what you're doing every few months, keep doing it until you find something that gels or that you enjoy. And so after a couple of years at EMA, we set up Duco out of jumped in the deep end, basically. We didn't have any clients. We didn't have any money. We just thought, let's set up a company and start running some events. And so we were at my mate's flat where we started the company, and we thought, what event should we do? China was the hot topic at the time. New Zealand had just signed a free trade agreement with China. So we thought, all right, let's do a big trade summit on doing business with China.
A whim. This is a good idea.
Yeah, good idea. Yep. So we partnered with the Chamber of Commerce, and no one really knew who we were, and we had no credibility. So we thought, if you don't have credibility, you got to buy credibility. And so Mike Moore, who's recently passed away, former New Zealand Prime Minister, he was Director General of the World Trade Organization, got China in to the WTO. He just come back to New Zealand from Geneva. And so we thought, we'll get Mike Moore as our keynote speaker on the relationship between New Zealand and China.
I love just how you talk about, we'll just get Mike Moore, former Prime Minister.
Well, no. So we went out.
Be a story behind
he invited
that, right?
us out to his house and looked at us with suspicion, like, who are these likely lads? Because we're in our early 20s and we hadn't really done an event. And we sort of, he was a nice guy.
What's the initial connection, though?
He would have spoken on a breakfast event when I was working at EMA, right, the Employers and Manufacturers. He would have spoken on some sort of breakfast briefing event, political thing, and we met him. So he agreed to meet us, and we sort of convinced him, and he was wary, and we ended up paying him 10 grand or something to effectively lend his reputation. So then we started approaching HSBC, The Economist magazine. We approached their head of their intelligence unit out of Hong Kong, Fonterra, their head for China, the Chinese government for a minister, New Zealand government. And the reaction of everyone was, who are you? And why should we speak? And we go, we've got Mike Moore, the former head of the World Trade Organization, okay, good enough for him, good enough for us. So they all signed on. And the lesson there is that if you don't have credibility or reputation, you can rent it and leverage off it. So we managed to get some sponsors on board. The New Zealand Herald became a partner via Fran O'Sullivan, and they wrapped the whole paper for the whole country on the day, and it sold out at the Hyatt Hotel. It made a profit for us of about $70,000, which we thought was massive at the time. So that was the first event.
That's perhaps, again, a representation of what you are now, ballsy plays. For a couple of young 20-somethings with no money behind them, to throw 10 grand at someone on the risk that you'll fill up the board after that seems like a big balls move.
Well, the process, if you like, or the psychology is no different to the Parker Joshua fight at Millennium Stadium, which sold 80,000 tickets and did 2 million pay-per-view buys in Europe. And it turned over $50 million, but it was effectively the same, process of securing the product, taking the risk, lining up the right sponsors, partners, etc., and then rolling the dice.
But like you buying that podcast mic last year, putting your hand in your pocket for $300 and getting a Blue Yeti, and away we are.
There we are. Yeah, what a purchase.
Is Seamus an Irish?
It is. It's extraction.
You don't look very Irish.
No, I get this a lot. I've got a long. I can tell you the story off mic. People will fall asleep otherwise.
Okay.
So you've done this successful public speaking situation with Mike Moore. And then does that just snowball and you get a bit of confidence and you get a bit of reputation for doing a good job at these things?
Well, we started doing more business conferences, China, Australia, motivational stuff, product development, and it just got boring and sort of started to tail off. And it got to about 2007. We weren't really making that much money, and we ended up having Prince Andrew, His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, who was the UK trade representative, and give me a few months, and if I fail, you can keep the $500,000. So they thought, fair enough, we'll just keep your money. And then he went to Ali's people, same thing, and they said, have you got form? And he goes, yep, here's an option contract. So he got the two fighters, and then he managed to convince the dictator in the Congo, or what's now Zaire, Mobutu, to underwrite the 10 million, and the rest is history. And so we had David Tua speak on a business conference in Wellington a month or two earlier, and I just had an exchange with Tua, and he wasn't training at the time. He was a bit out of shape, and it was on my mind, all that calling out from Shane Cameron in his camp. He had Eric Watts and Mark Hotchram behind him, and they'd spent 3 years calling out and baiting David Tua, but the fight hadn't happened. But all sports fans in New Zealand were like, wow, that'll be massive, right? So I thought, wonder why that hasn't happened. And I was in that, I guess, in roll the dice mode, because I was sort of thinking of giving up anyway. So I thought, fuck it, may as well give it a go, and so, and then
with no boxing background.
No boxing background whatsoever.
So was the trip to When We Were Kings just socially interesting for you, or was it just a chance viewing of?
No, David Latali was a massive admirer of Muhammad Ali, right, and he was the one that dragged me along.
So did you go eyes open, or just
no?
I'm going to watch something?
No, I just thought I was going to a movie. But through the course of the movie, I then the Fight for Life event here had been going strong, and it sold a lot of tables at Trust Arena. Like, I think at its peak, it sold 300 tables at $5,000, which is $1.5 million. So I was thinking about our business conferences and speaker events, thinking how little revenue they make. And I was thinking, if you got the Tua-Cameron fight, you could sell, if it went like Fight for Life, you could sell 100 or more tables at this many $1,000. TV rights, and I had no idea what they were worth, and there'd never been a pay-per-view event in New Zealand. So I was like, gee, the TV rights must be worth a lot. I didn't really know. Sponsorship, tickets, maybe international TV, food and beverage, corporate hospitality. And so I just started adding up and thinking, this is a big event. And then I saw that the Cameron camp had offered to a $200K, and their approach was quite sort of rude, and so Tua just always knocked it back. So I thought, well, we're clean, we got no baggage in boxing, we'll go to David Tua and just blow them out of the water, like offer more. And so David...
How old are you at this point, Dave?
28. So David went to his gym and he was sizing us up, and we said, look, we don't have much of a background in boxing, but we're good, honest people that know how to run an event, and we think the fight's worth more than what they've offered. We're prepared to offer you X. We had a negotiation and it ended up around $500,000 or thereabout. And he signed an option agreement to do the fight. And then we thought, now for the easy bits, because Cameron's been asking for years, so we'll just go off for Cameron $50K and it'll be a lot. Yeah, but it wasn't quite like that. Like they were outraged. We secured Tua. They were very difficult to deal with, had no interest, tried to make us go away. So there were about a few months went by of them stonewalling, saying we're going to promote it, we don't need you. And eventually it got in the media, and it was front paging the Sunday Star Times and Sunday News, and week in and week out was front paging sports, and the pressure was coming on to Cameron. And so, and I wasn't used to media, actually. I'd never done a media interview, so we were terrified of the media back then. Like, we didn't know what you could and couldn't say, or on and off the record. We were petrified, and so avoided it. And I sort of got forced into making some comments, and it went okay. And then eventually we got more confident, and we said, look, and we weren't sure whether Cameron's camp were conveying the offer. They were, in the end, they demanded parity, the same money, and so in the end, we sort of went public saying, "Look, this is enough money to buy a house and set Shane Cameron up," and we agreed to parity. So the fight was put together with them both getting that amount of money, $500,000 each, which we didn't have.
So was that your first kind of hard negotiation as well? Like had Mike Moore haggled over?
No,
his
it was another level. Like there were threats and lawyers and Hodgson had us sign a personal guarantee as thick as a telephone book, and so it was a different type of negotiation, and so we had this tiger by the tail, but then we had to kind of cash flow fund it because we had to pay the boxers every month, leading in.
Oh, right.
So it's a matter of getting money in quick enough to pay out. And when we first announced it, some quite respected people just rubbished it. Sir Robert Jones rubbished it. Murray Duco
would have had a go.
Yep. And here am I trying to convince sponsors and corporates to give us their money. And then I'm unheard of, and you've got these respected people like Duco and Jones saying that it's a debacle, no boxing events worth this guy's going to go bankrupt. And it created a few problems. And that's...
Is this exciting or stressful for you at this point?
Both. Exciting and stressful.
Yeah.
But, I guess I had nothing to lose. There's a Bob Dylan song where he says, if you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. And that was kind of... My attitude is that what's the worst that can happen? I end up with nothing again. So may as well give it a go. And it's quite liberating, that kind of... Once you get used to that mindset. Doesn't mean you should do stupid things. It was always... It was always a gut feeling that we were right about it and it would be a success. So it wasn't completely gung-ho.
So my research tells me that you picked up the phone actually and called those two gentlemen to say, what's going on here, guys?
Yeah. So most people will blacklist people, media, right? A lot of people go, oh, I hate that journalist, he's an arsehole. And so I went the other way and just rang them up and said, hey, I don't really appreciate you rubbishing what we're trying to do without having the courtesy to call and ask how we're going to do it. And both of them said, all right, how are you going to do it? And so they both gave me a good 45 minutes on the phone to go through, and both were considered. They said, all right, you've obviously thought about it. We're still not convinced, but we'll lay off the, absolute rubbishing. And so over time, both those gentlemen actually became, they came on board, if you like, and by the time we were near the event, they were helping promote it. And Murray had me in for an hour on his show, and they were both quite gracious in the end. And yeah.
And so it gets over the line. You're building up to fight night. We talked about stressful and exciting. Is it ramping up? Is there a sense that this is going to be successful, or are you thinking right until the day that I don't know which way this is going to go?
So I managed to get Hamilton City on board.
They were like Zaire.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that.
As a resident, I think we can say that.
So and their commitment was the first sort of building block. Without them, we're stuffed. Then we managed to sell some corporate tables. Our front row table was $18,000, which was unheard of in New Zealand history. And then I was going to be outdoor at Waikato Stadium. Shane Cameron had a tune-up fight, which we didn't want him to, broke his hand.
That's right.
So it got delayed to like October, and it had to go indoor to Mystery Creek, which was a blessing in disguise. I would have gone bankrupt if it had been outdoor. The costs were like $500,000 higher, and there wasn't time. So, it's funny, serendipitous things happened along the way, and that was one of them. Anyway, so there was the event was so expensive with the purses for the boxers and all the other costs. It was probably $2.5 million costs to cover. And so, and remember, there's never been a pay-per-view event. So we couldn't get substantial offers from TV3 and TVNZ. So in the end, we ended up pay-per-viewing it on Sky, right? And John Follett and the team at Sky, right? And I remember a meeting where they were sitting around the table with some of the management, and Follett asked each person, how many pay-per-view buys is it going to do? And, someone says 15,000 buys. The record at the time was Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis coming in from Vegas had done, I think, 22,000 pay-per-view buys. Someone says 20,000 buys, and then I said like 80,000, and they all laughed. And Follett said, "Why do you? What makes you think it'll do that?" And it's to do with number of subscribers. So I said, "How many subscribers did you have back in 2002?" And they told me X. How many do you have now? And it was like triple. So I said, "I know this isn't a world title fight, but it's the two toughest guys in the schoolyard. So if the demand ratio is the same as Tyson Lewis, but you've got 3 or 4 times the subscribers, then it should be able to do that many buys." Anyway, so week of the fight, we're like nearly $1 million in the hole. And so we literally, if the fight only matched the previous record, we're going under. We're losing $500,000 and we're a national disgrace on the front of the paper. Yeah. And the funny thing about pay-per-view is it all comes in mostly on the last day or two, 70% on the day.
Yeah, it's texting people going, "Do you want to come round and talk about buying it? What do you reckon?" So
that final few days, there was a sense of like, for me, there was a sense of magic. I just felt like it was going to work. Don't ask me why, and it had never been done. I mean, we needed to double the previous record just to break even, but they came in like the night before. From memory, there was about 20,000 buys in, and on the day, John Follett was texting us hourly. He was in the call centre himself taking calls, because back then they were inundated, and every hour I'm getting, it's going 25,000 buys, 30,000, 35,000 buys, 40,000. So we broke even at about, probably 4 or 5 p.m. And then it just went up and up, and it broke all records.
Where did you watch it? Do you remember watching it?
Yeah. I was at living in Mount Maunganui at the time. Yeah, group of...
In the poker house?
Yeah, in the poker house. Yeah, about 15 of us all got together. It was huge. It was a mess. Not even having bets on who was going to win.
Yeah, same here. Someone else bought it, and we all went round, and it was the same thing. I had Tua in the second, and I won, thanks to the referee. It was good.
Massive. But were you, the night of the fight, do you care who wins? Do you just want it to be a good spectacle? Do you even care if it's a good spectacle?
Look, if I'm an independent promoter, generally may the best man win. In that particular case, I was hoping David Tua would win, and I thought he would. And Shane Cameron's a lovely guy. Massive respect to Shane Cameron, but his team were unpleasant to us and made it very hard and weren't fun to work with. And so for that reason, I was hoping Tua would do the job, and he did.
Mm. So after the fight, the final numbers come in, you must just be cloud nine.
Oh, elate. It was surreal.
It must be the best night.
Well, it was surreal,
and it's in Hamilton as well, and you're going, fuck.
It was one of the biggest sporting events of the year. In fact, it's gone down in pop culture history. Like it was the first pay-per-view event on New Zealand soil. It's still number one for the number of pay-per-view buys. We went from potentially bankrupt to having, a successful outcome and money to invest in the future. We were, definitely well into overdraft, and John Follett was quite good. He rang us the next day and said, "Come out to Mount Wellington," and he gave us a check, and this is a bit cheeky. I hope he doesn't mind me saying, he handed us this bank check, and he goes, "Here you go, boys. That's more than TVNZ's profit for the whole year."
Oh, jeez. So are you living off that glow? Is it like a week of just, you're the hottest property in town, everyone wants to know more about you? Was it like that?
Oh, yeah. People were like... curious because we stayed out of the media as much as possible. Like I did newspaper, but I was petrified of going on TV. So people were like, "Who are these guys?" And it was and so it definitely got attention, and that's what got us into boxing and then sport in general, because we then created the NRL Auckland Nines Rugby League tournament, the Brisbane Rugby Tens, the Black Clash. Cricket rugby event, and so various other sporting events followed.
Which kind of leads me into the next point. I've heard you like to use the phrase, "I create unicorns." What do you mean? Is that something you say?
It's a bit of a piss take with the staff. There's a culture of humour, but I like to this people that were working with us. What's a unicorn? It's something that hasn't happened before. It's a unique thing, a one-off. And so the NRL Auckland Nines was quite unique, and people would have said that's impossible. The Black Clash event where you have the current and former All Blacks playing the former Black Caps in a game of cricket. So people sort of scoffed when we first floated that one. Joseph Parker is the first New Zealander to ever win the heavyweight world title. So it's sort of referencing trying to set impossible or semi-impossible goals, stuff that's exciting or motivates us, and then trying to make it happen.
So once you've created a unicorn, is there a risk that you just chase unicorns?
Yeah, and to be honest, I get a bit bored of doing... So once we've established an event, like say the NRL Auckland Nines, putting it together was exciting. It took 2 or 3 years, negotiating complex international contracts with the NRL, Eden Park, the sponsors, the players, that. But once it's done, I don't really want to run it each year, and so then you end up chasing. I personally am chasing something new and interesting that I haven't done before. But everyone's different, Some people are very good at managing and organising events. I'm not. Don't be fooled into thinking I'm a good event manager or event person. Absolutely not. I'm terrible. What I'm good at is thinking of an idea or something interesting. Then it's judgment. Will it work or not? There's a sort of intuitive judgment on whether it'll make money and whether you can make it happen. Will it sell tickets? And then making the deals, be it with the content, whether it's a speaker like Richard Branson or the NRL, the broadcast deals, the sponsorship deals, the deal-making part I enjoy. And then after that, I'd rather hand it over for people to run it that are good at running events.
Is the underlying driver to successfully run these events that people tell you they can't do, or is it more financially motivated? You spoke at the start about sort of thinking about moving away from the path because you couldn't buy a house, you couldn't financially support yourself. Is it more about the money, or is it more about just succeeding in what you're doing? No
one in my immediate family ever had a house, so I was obsessed with buying a house, or my mum at least having a house. And then I ended up getting my mum into a house and buying my own. And then something funny happened once I owned my own house. I was lying there and it was raining, and I thought, shit, it's the same as renting. The roof keeps the rain off, the door opens and shuts, and renting and owning the house are the same thing. The house functions the same way, and I sort of got over that obsession. So it would be wrong. I'm not motivated by money, but obviously things have to work financially, or you'll fall over. I guess creating a new event is satisfying, and I'd liken it to like a sculptor or an architect, to have a vision in your head for something, to work out how you would make that happen, what the steps are, and then to take those steps one by one and overcome challenges, and then get halfway there, and then people are starting to believe it's going to happen, and then take more steps and then finish it, and then to stand there and see it. And it takes me back to the first year of the NRL Nines. I was standing next to Andrew Johns in the stand at Eden Park, and he wasn't paid to be there. He was there to help promote in that. And I wasn't a rugby league tragic. I didn't know everything there is to know about rugby league. But he turned to me and he said, "David, I want to thank you." And he said, "I played in this many grand finals and this many state of origin matches and this and that and the other. I'm the immortal thing." And he said, "This is one of the most amazing highlights of my career, to see this celebration of the game I love, to see all the fans decked out in their colours, from the green Canberra to the Warriors, the sun's out, everyone's having a great time, and to see that showcase of our game at its best, blah, blah, blah." And then he said, "If ever you want me to come out and help promote in the future, just give me a call." And so that it was kind of satisfying to look at that event, which 2 years earlier was a pipe dream.
Then do you struggle after the lights go out and everything's packed out again? Do you get that post-event blues?
Yeah. It's a yo-yo thing. Yeah, you go up on a high, and then you'd probably stay at home for a couple of weeks and find it hard to go to work, and there's definitely ups and downs.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Like I've struggled with that on overseas tours, and you come back and you just kind of like, with teams, like I don't have to be at breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning, or we don't have that daily work in progress meeting at 8 o'clock, or that hot debrief, or all those sorts of things. It just kind of all fades away. And if you haven't done events, you can't relate.
An event virgin myself. Yeah. Learning from
Maybe
the best.
Pop that cherry one day.
You sort of briefly touched on it there. I'm quite interested in. I'm really fascinated by your incredible mind, which is different to the way a lot of people think. But growing up in school, were you sort of a top of the class sort of character? What sort of characters are you hanging out with at school?
I was an introvert. And so my mum, our childhood situation, we're very poor. Like poverty would be the word I'd use, and so we weren't the cool kids, my brother and I. And so I was just quiet. I'd sit at the back, and I was a bit of a geek. I was smaller and lighter, but I'd see things. Like I'd watch what's going on with the other kids and the teacher, and I'd often see things that other kids might not see. So one of the teachers said, "Oh, you're a very perceptive kid," or whatever. And so that through primary school, I was there. Yeah, I wasn't top of the class. I was probably in the top academically, and I was always, I guess, aware that I needed to do well just because of my home situation. I thought, I don't have the luxury of, smoking cigarettes and wagging every class because, I don't have wealthy parents to fall back on. So, I've got to look after my mum, and this is on me. And so I wasn't, I didn't massively enjoy the academic stuff, but I did enough to get good grades, and then went to university, and the rest is as we discussed.
Yeah, and did you hang out with a good crowd?
Well, yeah. We've got a tight group of high school mates like David Latally and that we still mates today. Actually, a couple are over in Australia, and but they're all good guys that have all stayed out of trouble.
How does it? What does that do for your relationship with money, coming from sort of poverty or very very little, to helping a guy like Joseph Parker, who's sort of getting 14-15 million for a Anthony Joshua fight? Is that tough to wrap your head around, the numbers, or how do you relate to that?
Oh, you get used to it. I mean, the first big transaction I paid out, well, obviously there was the Tua-Cameron fight, was $500,000 per fighter. The NRL 9s, the guaranteed prize money was a couple of million or more, and so that was. I remember transferring that from my phone, the wonders of modern from a pub,
wow.
The wonders of modern technology. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, I'm sitting in a pub, 8 beers deep, transferring X million to the, technology allows that. And then with the Joshua Parker fight, it was a proper joint venture. So we and Matchroom, or Eddie Hearn's organisation, jointly owned it, and we had an escrow bank account where I signed off every cost and we agreed everything. So it was a proper, and the telephone numbers in it were extraordinary. I mean, that stadium in Cardiff, Principality Stadium, which was Millennium, that thing's it's a 7-figure amount to hire that. Then you look at the undercard fighters, guys like Povetkin on the undercard. Huge purses but the head Russian billionaires behind him, and that's which was so we didn't have to cover all of that. And then the broadcast, I think British Sky Sport did 1.7 or 1.9 million pay-per-view buys.
It is quite hard to sit here and try and comprehend those figures. Like rationally, I understand what you're saying, but when it's in reality and you're physically signing that off, that's quite surreal.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. And funnily enough, our team and the Matchroom team got on really well and built real trust. And there was not a single dispute over a single line. And you imagine a budget that's, got 150 lines of cost in it. And in New Zealand dollars, I think it was 48 million, right? But there was not a dispute. We remain friends today, and that enabled us to do the Dillian White fight that followed, effectively on a handshake.
I wanted to ask you that, like, when you're trying to line up, and we'll probably get into the detail later on, but a Parker versus Joshua fight, are you just picking the phone up and ringing Eddie Hearn, or are you sending a WhatsApp, or are you emailing him? Or
So with Parker versus Joshua, Joseph Parker was the current WBO world champion, and he had gone to Hughie Fury, Tyson's cousin, Hughie Fury's backyard, Manchester, in the most terrifying promotion we've ever been part of. I mean, the death threats and proper menace, and everyone who was part of that will never forget it. Like, it was a different level to the Joshua fight. Was friendly in comparison, but Joseph won that fight, and Joshua had 2 heavyweight belts, I think IBF and WBA, and sort of we thought it made sense to unify that Joshua fights Parker. So I just rang Eddie up and I said, why don't we have Joshua fight Parker? And he rightly said, Parker's not big enough in the UK yet. Yeah, he's world champion, but the Hughie Fury fight was on YouTube. It didn't have a terrestrial broadcaster. And he's not really got people's attention. So he said maybe in another year or two.
And Eddie Hearn's a big deal for those guys who aren't boxing aficionados listening to this.
Well, the Hearn family created the snooker and the darts, and they'd be turning over $1 billion now. They've sold out Wembley and Millennium Stadium many times. Hearn's the biggest promoter in boxing. But anyway, so he said, yeah, Parker's not a big enough name yet, and the fans aren't demanding that fight. So we thought, okay, we'll revisit that. And so we started trying to negotiate with Lucas Brown in Australia to come over here. And I ended up at my my mate's son invited me to grandparents' day, to the horror of my friends, when they said and the granddad was Sir Peter Leach, right? Now, Sir Peter couldn't make it. Yeah. And so Matt said, I want David to come instead. And they were like, what? And so I thought I better turn up on time. So I ended up at St. Kentigern's College, and it was Matt and I in a sea of elderly people with tea and biscuits and so on. And we ended up in the assembly, and we were talking, we got told to shut up, and there were speeches going, it was quite boring. And so I ended up sort of looking up and daydreaming, and I started dwelling on what Eddie Hearn said about no one's calling for the fight and Parker's not a big enough name. I thought, how would you fix that? How would you fix those issues? And in my travels in the UK, I'd met all sorts of boxing people over the previous year, from Peter Fury to Tony Bellew, to Eddie Hearn himself. And without naming names, every one of them had a story to tell me about how Anthony Joshua was getting flattened in his sparring, in his training camps. And this was never talked about in the public or the media. But everyone was consistently saying he's getting knocked out in training. And there was video, but the British media would not go near it because Joshua was a gold medal winner. He was idolised. And also his management were the type that would say to the media, if you mention that, you'll never have another interview.
Blacklist.
Yeah, so they blacklist. Yeah, so it was almost like the emperor's new clothes. So I thought, why don't we just come out swinging? Joseph Parker from New Zealand accusing Joshua of having a glass jaw, being chinny, glass jaw, mentally weak, emperor's new clothes, and I thought, if we do that right, it'll create outrage in the British fans and media. Everyone will know who Joseph is, and then the fans will be saying smash him and demanding the fight. So I convinced our team.
So this is all in the process of this.
Yeah, I'm sitting there. And yes. So I came out of the grandparents thing, and I thought this is Eureka. I've got it. So I started ringing Joseph and Kevin, and we got to come out attacking Anthony Joshua, saying he's got a glass jaw and that we know he's getting knocked out all the time. And obviously, because no one's doing it, everyone's a bit wary. And I was wary. Like I was nervous about doing it because you're sticking your neck out, but it just felt right. And so I convinced our side. And so Joseph did some beautifully scripted tweets that we worked on, and doing exactly that. And there was outrage. Like the British came out mocking us, mocking our press conferences, calling us amateurs. But it worked. And then the British press started saying, "Who's Joseph Parker?" ringing me up. And then I just was throwing more insults at Joshua, and then the New Zealand media would cover it, and it became like a game of tennis with the time zone. You have the New Zealand media asking us, are we closer to the Joshua fight? The British media loved the stuff we were saying about Joshua's glass jaw. A month went by, and then Eddie Hearn said to me, keep doing what you're doing.
It's quite an un-Kiwi thing to do, right? It's why Israel Adesanya gets up people's noses so much, because he calls people out and he has an opinion publicly. So did you, while the New Zealand media were covering it, were there some quarters kind of condemning what you were doing?
Yeah, always. Every successful thing or time we've been right, there's a lot of knowledgeable people that rubbish us, say we're doing the wrong thing. And then history often shows that we were right. But in this case...
Andy Ruiz did that.
In this case, a lot of conservative New Zealand sport media probably thought what we were doing was embarrassing, or, a waste of time, or trashy, or whatever. But at the end of the day, it secured a sporting event, which was the biggest single sporting event in New Zealand history by revenue, the biggest ever payday for one-off performance by a New Zealand athlete, probably the biggest ever audience to watch a single athlete compete, or up there, and the biggest pay-per-view result in European history. It broke about 5 records, and so, we must have got something right.
It must be incredibly satisfying to come up with an idea. I guess, I don't know if you'd call it like guerrilla marketing, trying to manufacture worldwide outrage between two countries and doing it and it working and it just being like, this is fucking incredible. And on the back of it, you get this huge fight. Like, that must be incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, and at the time, I didn't really, looking back, it was like a 4-month riding a comet, really. And it sort of all happened real quick. And the fight itself, I remember, they closed all the streets around the stadium because of glass bottles and that, and we had a police motorcade into the stadium, and as we got close to the stadium, there were Welsh police on horseback, like in a row, and it was almost like coming into Rome, after, whatever. It was quite memorable, and Joseph was very relaxed. I don't know how he relaxes going into the ring in front of 80,000 people, but he took it all in his stride.
I was just thinking, how if you post an Instagram photo and you get 100 likes or something, you're like, yeah, shit, that was awesome. Just thinking to hatch an idea and then for it to go gangbusters must be a whole different level of kind of satisfaction.
Yeah.
We kind of briefly glossed over it, but I want to dig in a little bit. Talking of manufactured outrage, the Hughie Fury fight, the first week of the fight week, the press conference, huge headlines everywhere. The sort of outspoken, was it was Peter Fury, who you sort of went at. Was that manufactured outrage?
So what happened is that Peter Fury and I kind of built a rapport on the telephone months earlier, and we agreed the financial terms, and the purse guarantee amount was 1.2 million US was to be put in our lawyer's trust account. We agreed that the referee would be neutral and that there'd be a balanced panel of judges. The contracts reflected that. Anyway, heading into the fight, the WBO rules for world title fight required a neutral referee, and the British Boxing Board of Control selected what I would call the house referee. This referee had done Hughie's last 2 fights, and he'd presided over some proper shocking decisions. He was the house guy, right? And that was a breach of the spirit of our agreement. It was a breach of the WBO rules, and it was also a breach of the contract. So behind the scenes, I'm lobbying away, politely, getting nowhere. They're ignoring me. They're treating us like colonial and not thought they didn't care, right? The British Boxing Board of Control is big and powerful, full of barristers, QC lawyers, judges. It's considered the best organisation in the world, but they wouldn't even respond. So in the end, I got the president of WBO send a letter in. did legal letters. It was all being ignored. And so tension was building between the camps. And to be fair to Peter Fury, I don't think it was so much the Furies. And Peter was finding it a bit embarrassing that the British board was taking this position and apologising. Anyway, long story short, we get to the fight week press conference in London. And at this stage, the fight's getting no publicity. A lot of people think it's not going to happen, that the travelling people will pull out. It's on YouTube for the broadcast. And we've got the house referee. So it's a bit of a shambles, right? And so I'd roped in Francois Botha, the South African heavyweight who fought Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Klitschko. And I'd asked him to host our tour group of New Zealanders, like be a bit of a host. He's a good, lots of stories, wonderful guy. And I said to him his job is also to antagonise the travellers at the press conference and, just give him some jip, right? and he's got good one-liners. Anyway, so I'm in the hotel asleep the morning of the London press conference and my phone goes off. So I answer the phone. It's Francois. He goes, "Oi, Higgins, it's the Buffalo. Where are you? Come down to the bar." So I get out of bed, brush my teeth, have a shower, go down the bar. And he loved his tequila. He goes, "Tequila?" And I go,
sorry, what time?
It would have been 9:30, 10 a.m. Nice. Francois goes, "We'll have tequila. We've got to warm up." Because remember, Francois, Don King came up with the term white buffalo. So he's a promotional genius. Like Francois has been in some of the biggest promotions in boxing history on Tyson, Holyfield undercards and so on.
Parker, right?
Yeah, Parker knocked him out in his first pay-per-view fight. So Francois says, "Tequila, so we have a tequila, then another one." And then he says, "Higgins, what are you trying to achieve at today's press conference?" I said, "Well, Francois, we have two problems. One, the fight's getting no publicity. And two, they won't change a damn referee. It's like the house referee, they're ignoring us." And Francois sort of pauses. He says, "We need to make a scene." and so we didn't really discuss it beyond that. We all piled into this van and went down to the Landmark Hotel. And then the presser was starting at about 11. And so Francois and I sit in this waiting area and he's ordering another tequila. And then a staff member, one of my staff comes and says, "Francois, Dave, you better get down there to the top table. The media are there. They're about to begin." Francois says, "No, make them wait." And then orders another. And then 10 minutes go by and the staff member is saying, "Guys, they've started." He says, No, make them wait." Then about 20 minutes passed. He says, "Okay, we go now." So we just walked in and there was no plan. I was like a man possessed. Like I was genuinely outraged and I knew that Peter's a handshake guy and we'd agreed neutral referee. And so I just walked straight up to Peter and I just looked him in the eye and said, "We agreed a neutral referee. How can it be a fair fight if your cousin's a referee?" And then he looked at me and then some massive 7-foot security guard started pushing me out. And then Peter just went off, "Who the F are you?" This, that, and I thought I was relatively calm, and I stood there, and then I left.
Both are at this stage.
Oh no, he was following around.
He's at the back.
Yeah. So, but the funny thing is, I got my message across in plain English and remained relatively calm, and then I left. Anyway, what then happened is, the New Zealand media ate me for breakfast. They wrote me up as a lunatic, a maniac, a disgrace, an embarrassment. They absolutely savaged me. And then the British media wrote Peter up as a lunatic, a maniac, a savage. They savaged him, the Sun and the Daily Mail. And so he got roasted up there. I got roasted down here. I was back in my hotel. Joseph and Kevin didn't know what to say. It was all a bit embarrassing.
Were they unawares?
No, there was no plan. And then to be honest, I've never felt so alone in my whole life after that. I'm getting roasted by the New Zealand media. I'm a disgrace. My team are probably a bit embarrassed. The referee's not changed. I've upset some dangerous people. And I'm sitting by myself in my hotel room and I finally got some sleep. Next morning I wake up and there's lots of death threats on my phone from probably travelling people in Manchester. Messages like, "Can't wait till you get to Manchester, we're going to slit your throat," or "You better watch your back, we're going to shank you," or, stick a screwdriver in your spleen, that sort of thing.
Heavy stuff.
And so, Yeah, and it built a climate, and it's hard to describe unless you were in it. It built this proper menace, and there's a climate of fear, and it was not like any other promotion. And we ended up hiring Chechen former paramilitary security and for Manchester.
I've heard that before. I thought that was a joke.
No. And it was, and you don't know what's going to happen, because that promotion, there were legal letters, and you're in enemy territory, so it was not for the faint-hearted. And I have to admit, part of me just wanted to hide in the hotel. Yeah. Do you think I want to go to the weigh-in where I'm surrounded by who knows who, and their threats coming in? No, I didn't. I wanted to hide in my hotel, but I thought, no, I have to do it. So then, I thought, what do I do? And I thought I'll ring Peter up, and Peter's been a gentleman ever. He was a real gentleman. We would probably have to thank him for being the bigger man. But I rang Peter, and he said hello, and I said, Peter, it's Higgins here. Just calling to see how you felt about yesterday's press conference. And he sort of went silent. And I won't go into the full detail of the conversation, but he sort of said, look, I like you, and let it slide. And then he said to warn Francois to not speak like that at the next media thing. And then said that he'd have a word to the fans to sort of settle down, and that we'd have a fair fight. And to his credit, he was a man of his word. So respect to Peter Fury, who's been and the camps have become friends now. Joseph is a good friend to Tyson Fury, and there's mutual respect for Hughie and Peter and Tyson. And so we ended up. Joe won the fight, and the rest is history.
Is the lesson there? Don't do tequila shots before a press conference, or be smarter about who you go after?
The most important thing, which I forgot to mention, is it worked. The referee got changed next day.
Right.
So the next day I got a call from the British board saying, all right, we're going to give you a compromise. They changed out the referee. Do you think the same New Zealand media went out saying Higgins did really well and got the referee changed, his stunt paid off? No, not at all. You never get that. But it achieved both. It also put the fight on the map. So it put the fight on the map, and we got the ref changed. Sorry, and your question?
No, it was just a bit of a. Was it? Did you stop drinking before press conferences after that?
No. I'll be honest. If I hadn't had the tequila, I wouldn't have done that, and we probably wouldn't have had the referee changed. We might have lost the fight.
Yeah.
So there's interesting serendipitous moments, right?
Yeah.
Do you find that the perception of you outside of New Zealand is very different to the perception of you inside New Zealand based on those experiences, or is it quite similar?
I don't know. I think in the UK, people like characters or people that have an opinion. And so in the UK, it's funny, like even in going into Wales, you'll get people, and I by no means have any fan base like Joseph Parker or whatever, but there was a cult following in the UK, and there are people that would rubbish you on social media, and then the same people, if they see you, want a selfie or whatever. So it was quite, they just like characters in the UK. In New Zealand, the sporting landscape's probably a bit more vanilla. Like a lot of the big sport NGOs here sanitize the crap out of the players so that they're almost uniform robots, and any characters, it gets ironed out of you. And I think in this day and age, with all the youth into social media and all that, look at Israel Adesanya, how big he's become because he tells the truth, he's got an opinion, and he's a character. And so if I was running one of the big sporting organisations, I'd actually go the other way and encourage the players to do interviews on their own with the media without being mollycoddled by a media manager. Stop saying no to all the interview requests. Allow the players to have a crack a joke. And I think, there's some of the big mainstream sports are sanitising the players' images too much, in my opinion.
Is it being clever too? I mean, we've used two examples there, generating hysteria, sensationalism at the press conference, the tweet to get people going. That's not something traditional people at these NSOs would do or consider. Is it just thinking a bit differently and a bit laterally that you, if you were to give them advice on how to improve their sports, that is what you'd do? Think outside the box?
Well, I in a way, it's easier for us because we don't answer to a board or to, we're not, or the CEO. And so I can understand how it's probably more difficult in a corporate organisation where you can lose your job or where there's competition inside the workplace and all of that. So in a way, sort of when you're in charge, you can make decisions quickly and you can even make mistakes and no one's going to fire you. Like, that press conference in London we just talked about, if I was working for a sporting NGO and did that, I would have lost my job the next day.
Yeah.
And now people look back going, that was legendary, and it's kind of gone. It's gone the other way in hindsight. Now everyone's saying that was what a legendary thing. But at the time, people weren't saying that. They were saying that what drugs is he on? He's a disgrace.
Yeah.
Having been a media liaison on a tour with like a national team before. What's your media guy saying after that press conference? Or is he, because you're the boss, he's like, do what you want?
We had Craig Stanaway doing media. He was pretty good. Craig's a bit out. Craig's he's sort of a lateral thinker and left field and suited that role. So Craig and I were quickly strategizing how we're going to deal with it, because you have to deal with it. There's no hiding. Yeah. And so thank God they changed the referee, because we quickly did a press conference in David Hayes' gym where we announced that the referee had changed, and TV1 and TV3 were there. So that filtered out. And the key was winning. If we'd lost the fight, then I'd say there would be a lot of finger pointing at me because of. But everyone loves a winner, and Joseph won the fight, and everyone sort of moves on.
So I guess the flip side of that is the glass jaw stuff, right? With the Joshua fight, because Joseph didn't win that fight, and fair to say you probably antagonised.
Oh, look, Joseph didn't do enough to win on the day, and he'd admit that. He'd say he didn't leave it all in the ring. He's the first man to take Joshua the distance, but boxing is such a risky sport. Risky to your health. You can die, you can injure. Boxers start sometimes when they're 5 years old, like Joseph, and at any point they could lose or injure. Financially risky too, that if you get the big opportunity to fight for the world title and a 8-figure payday, you take it. And there's no win or lose, you take it, because you might never get that opportunity again. So there's absolutely no regrets with that Joshua fight. That absolutely had to be taken, and it allowed Joseph to set up his family and extended family and, be financially secure.
Well, let's talk about Joseph Parker, because you met him early doors before he was a professional and kind of guided him through to where he is now, and you're still his manager?
Part of the management team,
Yeah. So what attracted you to Joseph Parker as an unknown?
We'd been working with boxers on a one-off basis, David Tua, Tua-Cameron, after that, just one-off deals, and so there was no continuity. You weren't working towards anything long-term, and you were kind of starting again every fight, and so we thought, wouldn't it be nice to find a young talent that is willing to commit to a long-term plan to become world champion? And that way you're in more control rather than one-off events. And Joseph had bowed out of the Commonwealth Games. No, I think it was Commonwealth Games, yeah. And or Olympics, one or the other. And timing serendipitously, he bowed out at just the time we were looking to sign someone. And Bob Jones, his family had asked us to help arrange some sponsorship, so I put him together with Bob Jones. This is before he bowed out at the Commonwealth Games, so we knew him that way. And then when the games thing didn't happen, we put an offer and said, "Hey, why don't you sign with us, and we'll try and we'll invest heavily in you. We'll put fights on often. We won't shy away from risk. We will." Step up and try and win the heavyweight world title, and you'll be financially set up for life. And he delivered.
We had Eric Murray on the podcast, our last episode, and he spoke about his coach, Dick Tonks. He won 2 gold medals, 68 races unbeaten. We said, would you have done all that if not for Dick Tonks. He said, fuck no. He pushed me and directed me in a way that no one else could have. Very different for you, because obviously you're not training Joseph. But do you think that if anyone else had taken Parker under their wing, he would have been a world champion?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Joseph was asked that question, like if things hadn't serendipitously worked out and we met, he said I might probably be a builder out in West Auckland, but you don't know. I think the coming together of us and Joseph and Kevin Barry, the facts speak for themselves. Like, you don't have to guess. The team did achieve that goal. Joseph did become the fourth youngest heavyweight world champion in history, the first New Zealander to do it, defended it a couple of times. And so you get a lot of armchair critics, but what the team did speaks for itself.
I just want to jump around a little bit. I'm fascinated with the way your mind works, and again, talking about the rugby situation, New Zealand rugby in particular, quite boring, a lot of the stuff they come out with. It's very sort of cultivated, and they're not getting the outspoken opinions like, generate so much discussion on social media. One of the storylines that came out, it might have been start of the year or last year, was this hybrid All Blacks Kangaroos game. Is that the sort of thing that you think could work? Do you have any thoughts on that? So
that that game is like the Mike Tyson-Roy Jones fight last Sunday. So it's not a sporting contest. It's entertainment. They'll make a shitload of money. Or Mayweather-McGregor. That was never going to be an even close boxing contest. To a boxing fan, it's a joke. But it's massively entertaining for a wider demographic, and it's going to make a lot of money. And you can only really do that once. So the hybrid game is like that. It's like Mayweather-McGregor or Tyson the other day. It's something that you can get away with once. The fans will watch it because they're curious. It's got train wreck value, or what's going to happen. No one knows. Therefore, it'll generate a lot of money, probably be a fizzer, and just probably be crap. And then you can't really do it again. And then one side will lose, be it league or rugby. And, the boardrooms of those organisations will worry that does losing damage their legacy, their 100 years. Nah, they're overthinking. It'll be seen for what it is, a gimmick and a flash in the pan.
Unicorn.
Yeah. I mean, it could be done, but it's often these things aren't as spectacular as what you think they're going to be.
So how did you get the Black Clash to work then? Because that was quite spectacular.
Oh,
it did work.
The first year was magic, and it was one of those times when the stars aligned. Thank you. I mean, it could have easily been a fizzer, and we didn't know, but the game was, it was fantastic weather. It was nearly sold out at Hagley Park, Christchurch. I think Richie McCaw took a spectacular catch. Yeah. One of the Barretts had a bit of a blinder. And so and it was competitive. And in fact, the rugby side won. So that kind of was one of those occasions where all the stars aligned and the outcome was magic.
And is that you're just sitting in the office one day and you go, I've got it?
No, Stephen Fleming, the former New Zealand captain, lovely guy. He called me up and he said that because Steve and I did a charity event for Starship Foundation, a tribute to Stephen Fleming. And I was quite impressed with Stephen Fleming. He did everything he said he's going to do, and he did it promptly. And it was for charity. He didn't want to be paid a lot of money at all, and he was generous with his time and quite well connected. Like, he roped in some great names for the charity dinner on short notice. Up at Sky City here, we had Shane Warne, Sachin Tendulkar, Ravi Shastri, a lot of top Indian players, and so anyway, kept in touch a bit. And then he said, I've seen this game they do in South Africa, and it was a rugby cricket sort of thing in South Africa, and so he sort of said, why don't you have a look at putting something like that together? And so we first went to the players associations, Rob Nicol and Heath Mills, who have been great, and so and the game, part of it was to raise some money for player welfare, and so having them on board helped get the right players on board, and then TVNZ backed it. Good on them. They were a bit sceptical, and we managed to convince them that the public would be curious to see how these All Blacks are going to go playing cricket, and we said it has to be prime time on TV1, and they agreed, which is probably the first time cricket's gone prime time TV1 since the 1990s or sooner. Anyway, it broke a record. It's the number one cumulative cricket audience since 1990 something. It was bigger than the Cricket World Cup final audience.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
And the ACC commentated it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who weren't familiar with their work that tuned in on TV1
they were polarising.
Perfect fit. Yeah, perfect fit for that sort of thing.
Sense of bewilderment as to what they were listening to.
Well, take us in a slightly different direction. I want to hear about Symphony, because we actually had a friend run a chat group who messaged us independently of this, said, Symphony coming to Hamilton. Amazing, you've got to go.
Well, you should go. It's this Saturday.
I'll
go. Chase me up and I'll arrange you some tickets.
Done.
Yeah. What? So this is developed in the last year, was it 2019?
Well, so we didn't create Symphony. A couple named at the time David Elmsley and Erica Amore were the creators of it, and then they wanted to sell it, and so they were asking my advice, and I ended up grilling them about how it works, like a Dragon's Den style thing. And I'd avoided music events because I can't get my head around the act. With a music event, if you've got like Elton John, well, Elton John takes all the money, right? So the local, you'll sort of get the crumbs, but also you can't run it every year. You can't run it where you want or when you want. You get told, here's a date, here's a venue, and so you're not really adding much value. And so, but this Symphony event was quite different. Like, it was more brand driven, and it sort of took top electronic dance music tracks and had an orchestra perform the tracks mashed up with a DJ and guest vocalists. So it's quite unique, but also replicatable. Like, it occurred to us you could run it anywhere in the world, really, where there's an orchestra. And so, long story short, we ended up investing in and buying the event, and then Erica has been leading it for us, basically, one of the founders, and it's been growing. So this year there'll be 4 or 5 concerts across New Zealand, and then next year Australia, and then Macau, Vegas.
Wow.
So it's, yeah.
What does that process look like? You've obviously gone to see it and you've been impressed with it enough to buy it. What factors are you putting into whether or not I'm going to take over this company or buy this company?
It was, so I went, as part of due diligence, I went to it at the town hall, and it was magic. Like, the people were just loved it. The fan feedback was 10 out of 10. The uniform 10 out of 10. Like, there was no one who didn't love it. And it was a different demographic. Like, it was sort of people our age. It wasn't young people. Like, the music tracks selected
set list
were
is unbelievable.
Yeah, they were like sort of 80s, 90s, Fatboy Slim, Chemical Brothers, that sort of thing. And so it was probably a crowd with sort of money that reliving their youth a little bit, with an orchestra, which was something different, and it just went off. But I think the key thing was the ability to run it anywhere. Like, even in a pandemic now, you could run it remotely in Canada, Vancouver. You could find the local orchestra, get the local radio station, get some guest DJs. The orchestra sheet music is ownable intellectual property, and then promote it on Facebook. And so we've trademarked it in about 28 countries now.
Yeah, so that is the plan.
To grow. Like Cirque du Soleil, right?
Yeah.
Has become a global $1 billion business. It's kind of like trying to do what Cirque du Soleil has done, but it's a much lower cost because they're having to recruit like Mongolian dwarves that can do trapeze and stuff like that. And, some of the show sets in Vegas for Cirque du Soleil, like $200 million, right? So with Symphony, I don't know, it just felt, it was that gut feeling. I guess it was a gut feeling, even though it was not sport. We had a gut feeling that this thing has some magic about it and we can grow it.
I love the idea. It's so appealing.
Oh, man,
It's we're talking about it's like you say, it's probably our age demographic. It's over 35s maybe,
Yeah.
but it's just something that you'd love to go to. You have a couple of drinks, whatever. You sit there and enjoy the music.
I lost my whole Friday just looking through YouTube clips and then listening to the set list on Spotify. We actually had quite a big night on the weekend just gone, and we both agreed that was us for 2020 and half of 2021. And then I remembered we had you on and knew that Symphony was coming to Hamilton, and maybe there's one more left in the tank. Who knows?
A few other interesting bits. So, a couple of sources. One told me you were responsible for getting Obama to New Zealand. The other said you didn't get him, but you got Al Gore.
I didn't get Obama to New Zealand.
You didn't get Obama.
But we did bring Al Gore.
Okay, yeah. How did that come about?
That is mad.
Did you try for Obama?
I thought, no, I didn't. I didn't try for Obama. A lot of people say, how do you get Richard Branson to show up in Auckland and do a speech, or Andre Agassi, or Gordon Ramsay, or Al Gore? And it's actually not that difficult. So here's how it goes. You figure out who you want, and generally you can get anyone in the world to come here and do a speech, unless A, they really don't need the money, and they've got unless Bill Gates, he's got 100 billion or whatever, he's not going to do it for the money. Or unless it's like Queen Elizabeth II. But other than that, most people are accessible. And so the first step is find where their manager or agent is. So in Richard Branson's case, there's agents all over the world who rep him, but his management's in New York. Then you write to them.
This is good for us to get guests, by the way.
You write to them, and a lot of people make the mistake of saying, "Dear Sir Richard, will you speak at my event in Auckland on the 10th of June, and we can pay you $50,000. So they've killed it already, because he's probably already busy on the 10th of June. So, and second, the fee is nowhere near. So I actually went the other way, and I'll use Branson as the example. I said, will you speak at our event? You can tell us when, tell us the date, sometime next year, to fit with your travel schedule. And second, tell us what the fee is. And third, you need a bit of credibility and good cause. And in this case, it was Outward Bound's 50th anniversary. So anyway, and I said, look, the Rugby World Cup happens to be in October, the final in next year. So, and then they came back with the timing that worked for them, telling the fee that worked for them, which was a telephone number. And at first I thought, yeah. But then I thought, I've got a year. And so long lead time helps a lot. So generally speakers are gettable if you, it's a matter of what the fee is and the timing. And yeah, so you could bring anyone you want to Hamilton if you've got if you pay the fee at the right time.
All right, and that was the process that got Al Gore.
Yep, pretty much.
Easy. Okay, the next one I've got, sued Gordon Ramsay and won.
We settled.
Settled.
Yeah.
You able to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's on public record, so I can talk about the stuff that is on public record. I can't talk about the actual settlement. He'd signed up to do a charity event here, and through a speaker agency, contract signed, and he didn't. He pulled out, and he gave a reason which was sketchy. Is all I'll say. And
didn't trigger the force majeure
clause. And then we agreed new dates, and then he pulled out again at a few days' notice, and it nearly bankrupted us actually. Sure. And so, and I'd never really been through the court system, and for people that have never been in legal stoush, they often don't realise that you can get remedy. And so I would have probably rolled over and not done anything, but it was Bob Jones convinced me to sue the. I won't say how he described him, but I ended up suing for a lot of money, and it was a 1.5 year process, or 2 years, and the discovery was fascinating. That's where they have to give you every document, every email relevant,
right.
And legally you have to give everything or it's contempt of court, right? But most people probably would check. But, some people are so busy, they just said someone in the office, hand it over. So there's a telephone book of documents and there was some stuff in
some
there.
juice in there.
And so, and if the thing goes to trial, that all becomes public. And so... So we ended up having a settlement, and in the end, he was quite gracious. He showed up himself face to face. We had a quite a long mediation, and he made good. And he ended up coming back and doing an event, and he spoke really well. He helped raise some money for charity. He wasn't bitter. We ended up going to Waiheke and having lunch the next day and had a few yarns. So in the end, and he, to be fair to him, it turns out he had his own troubles in the UK at the time. So he had his reasons for not fulfilling the contract in hindsight.
You mentioned staring down the barrel of bankruptcy, which seems quite intimidating to me. But how many times has that been kind of a realistic thought in your head? I'm fucked here if this doesn't pull off.
A few months ago when the COVID lockdown first started.
yeah, let's talk about that.
When COVID lockdown started, we thought, oh shit. I've closed my Auckland office, closed my Melbourne office. We had to let some people go. Went on half pay for quite a few months, but in the end, I think it's made us stronger. I've probably taken a few $100K out of our annual costs, and I was working at High Street, our office, for 16 years. So, trundling into town in the traffic, finding a park or parking, and so in the end, I'm actually enjoying working from home. So, sort of on Zoom calls and that.
Mm. And has it given you a chance to kind of reassess operations and kind of blue sky think about
yes.
about future unicorns?
Yeah, so we've put quite a lot of time into Symphony and thinking about how we can expand that globally, and build real value into it. So that's been good. Obviously, the Parker fight is been postponed, and hopefully the new date will be announced in the next day or two, I think, and it'll be early next year. And we had a sold-out Symphony at Spark Arena a few weeks ago. And so I'm not going to complain. There's a lot of companies and people that are worse off than us. So, we're an event company, and it's tough, but we've managed to get Symphony away in Auckland. We've got another one in Hamilton. The boxing's coming up. So, it could be worse.
Has the dynamic changed at Duco? Originally, it was you and Dean were sort of equal.
No. So I started Duco in 2004 with a guy named John McRae.
Right.
I bought John out 6 years later in 2010. I hired Dean to sell corporate hospitality in 2009 on the Tua fight. And then Dean and I merged in 2012.
Right.
And then Dean left a year and a half ago. So Dean was there, a business partner, for maybe a third or so of the time.
Okay, but you were responsible at other stages. It wasn't like you had someone to bounce ideas off who was giving you equal feedback, and now you're kind of left to make those decisions by yourself.
I've got a business partner now. There's my business partner now is a woman called Rachel Carroll who works in Melbourne, Australia. Well, she's based in Melbourne, but she's fantastic, and we're bouncing ideas all the time. But she worked at ATED previously and oversaw the Rugby World Cup, and she's very good on that government consulting work. And so Rachel's actually been quite instrumental in some of the big things we've done. We had Jeff Horn, another boxer, fight Manny Pacquiao at Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. Jeff Horn beat Manny Pacquiao and became welterweight world champion. Do you know, I sometimes forget we did that. Just because there's so many things and it's in Australia. But we had Jeff Horn beat Manny Pacquiao and win the world champion. And we had two world champions at the same time, Joseph Parker and Jeff Horn. And Bob Arum, who's, put on the Thriller in Manila, he's nearly 90, the legendary promoter, said, I don't think that's been done before, that a promoter only has two fighters and they're both world champions. Normally you have to have 100 and two of them are world champions. But anyway, so Rachel, for example, wrote that proposal for Queensland and Brisbane, and behind the scenes is doing a lot of that grunty.
It was in Suncorp, right?
Work. It was in sold out Suncorp.
Unbelievable.
And you know, over the boxing ring, there's a shelter thing that covers the ring. It's $500,000-600,000 to build that.
Wow.
That's
Jesus.
expensive doing
jeez.
boxing in an outdoor stadium.
And is that reusable, or is that like a one-time
No, it's
thing?
like, you know, when you go see Bruce Springsteen and they build the cover over the stage, it's a variation of that requires protection of the turf, trucks, you know, a lot of physics, huge pylons. It goes out well over the ring, and so to put that up, take that down, you're talking more than $500,000.
I'll jump back to Joseph Parker. When he retires, will that be it for you, boxing-wise? Have you kind of thought that through?
Not sure. Like I don't have any black and white plan like that. So it just depends, you know. Like, am I passionately devoted to paying blokes to punch each other? And, you know, what can you do in boxing? We've won the world title. For me, Joseph's a good guy that's helped a lot of people and is very loyal, and, you know, it's been a great journey. And so if the right person came along, then I probably would do it again. You know what I mean? But do I want to go and sign up a whole lot of people to try and make money? That doesn't really motivate me. But if it's the right person at the right time, it can be very exciting. And, you know, so it's hard to say, really. We'll just see what happens.
And has that transition from kind of promotion to management been an easy one for you to navigate?
It's similar, really. Like, effectively, you're making the deals, really. So I helped Joseph's current contract with Matchroom. I've helped put those terms and negotiated that deal effectively. Here, the fight he's in February, effectively I'm promoter and manager. But there's overlap between promoter and manager.
And then, sorry, mate.
We spoke about Cameron and Tua, the fight getting delayed, and it was a really good thing for you and saved Duco in a way, because otherwise it might have gone under. Is there a way to put a positive spin on this delay? Is there any sort of...
Yeah, there is. One, Junior Farr will be fully fit, and Joseph Parker, so you'll have both athletes into the ring at 100%, and that's what the fans want to see. They don't want to see someone hiding an injury or whatever, so they'll be fully fit. Second, it gives it more time to build up. I don't know if you saw Eugene Barrowman at the last presser.
Yeah.
It was all getting, like, Joseph and Junior Farr, both lovely, humble young men, you know, but there wasn't really any fireworks. And Eugene took me by surprise there, but he injected a bit of, some fireworks into the promotion. So it'll be interesting to see how the next media conference goes. And that's how Tua-Cameron kind of kicked off at Build. So I think by the time the fight rolls around, there'll be more time for it to ruminate and go both guys fit, and maybe some more fireworks.
Has that been frustrating for you, knowing what sells, knowing what captures people's attentions? It's that shit talking, it's that sort of rivalry, it's that civil war type stuff. Knowing that these guys they're not really built that way, and they've said that themselves, that they're not going to go about it that way. Are you sitting there thinking, I wish you would, or you kind of just accept that?
You can't manufacture it. Like Joe and Junior would look stupid if they tried to trash talk, because it's not them. Like it'll be awkward and embarrassing, and so we've never told or asked Joseph to trash talk, as you say it. The best things are sincere. Like Joseph sometimes will be sincerely angry or frustrated, and if you express that, people can tell, you know. So there's no point trying to manufacture too much. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you get guys like Francois Botha that are just they just shoot from the lip, like funny wit, humour. The fans love humour and wit.
Yeah. Shay, how are we looking?
I've got a lot of ticks. On here. I did want to. I forgot about the PNG thing. I'm just really interested in kind of your. Did you go up there?
Yeah. So
in your experience,
so
Stephen's got an experience, and he thinks it's an absolute shithole.
we ran rugby league games up there, but before that, I wanted to sell television rights to Joseph Parker fights for the Pacific. There's a telco called Digicel, headquartered in PNG. So I got a meeting with the regional CEO for Digicel. You can only go through Brisbane then. So I boarded a flight in Brisbane. I was sitting next to this Aussie bloke who was the CEO of Suncorp Bank. And I said to him, so what are you going up there for? He said, I'm on the board. We got a subsidiary up in PNG and I'm on the board. I go up every 6 times a year. I go, is it as bad as they say it is? And he said, mate.
Where did you stay?
I can't remember the name of the hotel. There's a couple. It was one of the big main hotels, and there was guards with AK-47s and razor wire. Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. No, it was not. Wasn't at the airport.
Okay.
But there's an expat community at the bar of the hotel, and it's like the landscape looked really nice. To be fair, I was only there 2 or 3 days. But, I'd heard some stories that it's not the safest place.
Yeah. 18 months was enough for me.
Oh, you were there 18 months?
I loved the 18 months, yeah.
Yeah. How was it?
Yeah, it was challenging.
Did you ever hit any run-ins or?
No, I was lucky. I was okay. I navigated my way through it. But, there's a fair share. Like, if you've been up there and you lived up there.
What were you doing there?
I was the CEO of the local organising committee for the FIFA Under-20 Women's World Cup.
Wow.
So
interesting.
We were a year before the Rugby League World Cup.
Yep.
And then a year after the Pacific Games. So it was event stuff was it was fly by the seat of your pants stuff.
This podcast is actually big in Papua New Guinea.
It is
it or not.
actually.
You can see the ratings.
Yeah, we were number one there for
number one
while.
in PNG.
Actually,
I think that's a legacy of my time. I think 3 people might listen to it up there, and there you go.
By experience, I was similar to Dave. I was only spent 3 days there, but we had armed guards outside our hotel with a gate, and then armed guards outside the hotel itself. I was thinking 2 sets of armed guards. That's pretty heavy artillery. If they get past the first set,
you did the Great Britain game, right? Is that the one that you guys did?
Yep. So Rachel Carroll, my business partner, oversaw that. Will probably went up there.
Yeah, Andrea Nelson tried to get me to go
Andrea,
up there.
yep. I personally didn't have a hand in that, but yes, I believe that was a game. Yep.
It was a great game.
Yeah.
It was a good, I know the guys that did the OB on that, and Anyway, that's for another. We're getting into details. It's another. We probably lost half our listeners.
Yeah,
now.
Last one for me. This has been amazing, by the way. Thank you so much. We're 90 minutes in, but hanging off every word. Samoan chief. You are a Samoan chief.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Makai, it's a high chief actually. There's the chief and high chief. No, look. So obviously we'd promoted David Tua, and I'd say treat him quite fairly, and we ended up promoting 1 or 2 more of his fights, and massive respect. He's sort of paved the way for Joseph, etc. to follow. And then Joseph and his family dreamed of him fighting in Samoa, and so a lot of people sort of said, you don't want to bother doing an event there. You won't make any money. You'll get ripped off, and so on. But And you get a bit bored doing the same shit year after year. So I sort of quite like the idea of running an event in Samoa, and learning how would you do it, where would you start, how does it work? Do you set up a company? Do you use a local partner? What venue would you use? How does the TV work? I ended up committing to the Parker family that we do a Parker fight up in Samoa on TV and in pay-per-view back in New Zealand. And so a lot of people were sceptical, and for the reasons I said. Anyway, so I ended up going there about 18 times, and the first time was sort of a research mission. And in terms of ticketing, I didn't want – they don't have Ticketek or Ticketmaster, right? So I wanted one party I could invoice for the ticket revenue that would pay me. So I ended up doing a deal with Digicel, who became a sponsor. They sold my general admission tickets through their phone shops, so that people go in and where they buy a phone and buy a ticket, and I invoiced Digicel. Corporate tables, which we did. I became friendly with the CEO of TV3 Samoa, a guy named Joe Kyle, who was really helpful actually. I trusted him. And he had an advert sales department who knew all the businesses, right? So I said, you sell my tables and I'll pay you a commission. So I ended up one invoice, right? The Prime Minister was really helpful, and he cops a lot of criticism But I was actually quite impressed that he'd be one of the most accessible prime ministers in the world. Any citizen of Samoa can have a meeting. You go to the parliament buildings, you queue up outside his office, you join the queue, you wait, and you can have a meeting with the prime minister and air your grievance or whatever it is. And that's quite unusual. And he, again, cops criticism, but he's an accountant in his late 70s who's a workaholic. He probably works more than 100 hours a week. He sits there, just meeting after meeting. People are 5-minute meetings. Next, what can I do for you? Next, day in and day out. And the first piece of evidence of a corrupt leader is they have a private jet, right? So Tuilepa, he's longest-serving democratically elected prime minister in the Commonwealth, and there's no private jet. Every time he has to go to Brussels or Geneva or whatever, he has to fly to Auckland and then out. And his job, frankly, then I think their number one revenue source is foreign aid. So his job is to go around the world lobbying, and you have to know the system. And so when he passes away or finishes, whoever steps in, they're not going to have 30 years of contacts and knowledge to go how to go to Brussels or Geneva or the UN or the World Health Organization. So there's a lot more to it. And he's copped a lot of criticism because of the rugby stuff and a lot of New Zealand media. But, compared to a lot of other countries, it's actually one of the better in some ways. Anyway, long story short, so I ignored all the naysayers and treated the local businesses and suppliers and sponsors like I would anyone here, with respect, do a deal, shake hands, draw up a proper contract, invoice on time. I got paid every cent. I got quite a bit of local sponsorship, paid every cent, no drama, no hassle, no corruption. We had to import a Sky TV studio up there. They sent it back here. And so it went, I think it was the first internationally televised live boxing event in Samoa. And then through that, I promoted Samoa and as a business destination, saying, hey, it's not, don't listen to people, the naysayers. And so anyway, when I was up there, Joseph's dad said to me, hey, David, they're going to offer you, they're going to give you a Matai High Chief title. I said, what? And he goes, there'll be a ceremony and you will be given this title as an honour. And I said, oh, should I accept it? And he explained, you have to accept it. Like, it's disrespectful not to. So I said, of course, it is an honour. And so we ended up having a ceremony in Alfanga, which is a village where my title comes from. And Joseph got given a title and I did. And we drank kava, and then there was a dinner with the Prime Minister, and then, I think there's only 3 or 4 non-Samoans who've ever been given that Matai High Chief title. Wow, really? It saved my life a few times with bouncers and nightclubs and stuff. No, I mean, people, they'll say, oh, you'll have no trouble on our watch. And so, and I sometimes forget I have a title, but it is a great honour to be given that title, I'd say, yeah.
Amazing. That's amazing. It's one of these things. I mean, you're still young. You've obviously still got a huge career ahead of you, but you think about all you've achieved and what you've done.
It is actually
a Samoan High Chief.
Funny story. I was talking to a prominent New Zealand rich lister who is a knighthood, Sir Joe Bloggs or whatever. I won't say who, but I said, do you know what? I think my Matai High Chief title outranks your knighthood.
I've got one last question, and it's from a fanboy perspective. But what's the best event you've been to that you haven't been directly involved in as a punter?
It was a concert called the Music Airs Person of the Year Award, and it was the Grammy Awards. It was a Grammy organisation, but the Grammys is actually a week of events. It's not one event, and they run a charity dinner annually called Music Airs Person of the Year. It's a black tie charity dinner, LA Convention Centre normally, and they pick a big name musician who's been philanthropic, and over the years it's gone to Elton John, David Bowie, Bruce Springsteen, Paul McCartney. This year was going to Bob Dylan, and then that person speaks normally, and they have a lineup of acts who all play a cover of that artist's song. So it's like a black tie dinner but a concert. And for the Dylan year, the people doing Dylan covers were like Norah Jones, Tom Jones, Willie Nelson, Bruce Springsteen, Neil Young, Eddie Vedder, Jack White. The list, it was like the greatest lineup in the history of music, right? And it was bucket list stuff, and the tickets were like $7,000 a ticket. And so I thought, shit, that would be amazing, because I was a Bob Dylan fan and I liked music and that. So I thought, bucket list, how do you go? And so I went to the Grammy website. You had to fill out an application form to buy tickets and be industry. So I filled out this application to buy 4 tickets and said we're promoters from New Zealand, and sort of made it sound like we fit. I get an email back saying that you're being considered. And then eventually I get a contract back saying you have to sign this contract. There'll be no photos, no recording. You have to pick up your lanyards from the Grammy office in LA. And so we went along to that. And I was sitting, President Jimmy Carter was at my table, because Bob Dylan wanted his award presented by the longest serving US president. And also on my table was this billionaire who owned the NFL team that had just won the NFL. The table in front of me, there was Ringo Starr, the drummer for the Beatles, chatting to Joe Walsh from the Eagles. That table, there was Tony Bennett, Lady Gaga. There was John Densmore, the drummer for the Doors. It was the who's who of like American Hollywood music. And then there was us.
When they tell the story, they'll be saying, and we had the Samoan High Chief.
These Americans on my table, like, who are you guys? Oh, we're just from New Zealand. But it was an amazing concert, and and then the other notable one I went to was the Mayweather Pacquiao fight, which was the worst money I've ever spent. To sit in the lower bowl at the halfway back was like $20K, and it was a terrible fight. That's the highest grossing event in human history. It turned over $1.2 billion. So, but still, I wouldn't go if they were chance again.
You could probably do something here for ours.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Shay, you all done?
Yeah, Look, again, me and Steve talk about this quite often, is that somehow through creating this podcast, we get an opportunity to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with some really cool people, and tonight's been one of those experiences. I did a lot of kind of research leading into it. Probably had a perception in my mind before I'd done that research, and listening to you before this blew it out of the water. Having you here tonight completely blown that out of the water, so it's been awesome for me.
Well, thanks, Seamus, and thank you, Steve. I hope your podcast is bigger than, what's that UFC guy's name?
Gone out of my head.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, the New Zealand Joe Rogan. No, thank you so much for your time. You're a busy man. Really appreciate it, Dave.
Cheers.